Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Informa Connect CBI. My name is Haley Wallishin, and I'll be your host for today's session titled Optimizing Product Launch Market Access Strategy and Gross to Net Modeling. First, I'll cover some quick housekeeping items. If you experience difficulties with audio or advancing slides, refresh your screen with F5. If you are experiencing other issues, hit the question mark button to receive assistance. At any time during the presentation, submit your questions into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of the screen. In 24 hours, you'll receive a link to watch the recording of this session. Now let's begin by introducing our speakers. Brett DiNatale, Head of Data and Analytics at Precision Xtract, and Romit Kamdar, Co-founder and Partner at Akara Group, LLC. Thank you both for joining us today. Now I'll hand it over to Brett to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Haley, and thanks to everyone who helped to organize this. To those joining, welcome. We appreciate you being here. As Haley mentioned, my name is Brett DiNatale. I'm Senior Vice President at Precision Xtract, which is part of the broader precision medicine group. I have 2 decades of doing analytics within the biotech and pharma space. And within Precision Xtract, I run a team doing commercial analytics for both pre and post-launch products. And we work to build tools to help our clients with their decision-making and do data-driven, analytic-driven insights. And with me is Romit from the Akara Group, and I'll let him do a quick introduction as well.
Thanks, Brett, and thank you everybody for taking time out today to join us. As already mentioned, this is Romit Kamdar with the Akara Group. I've been in the space for over 15 years around market access contracting, modeling, government pricing compliance, and working with all types of manufacturers, and especially recently emerging pharma and product launches, which is a lot of what this webinar is about. So I'm excited to talk about this today with Brett.
Thanks, Romit. So what we're gathered to talk about today, looking at optimizing your market access strategy for a launch product and driving that into gross to net modeling. We're really looking and talking about sort of how you go from those macro and down to the micro assumptions that help fuel a forecast, and how you get better insights and better information to drive those forecasts. And then how you have, when Romit picks it up on the back half, he'll talk about how you actually systematize and lay a foundation so that you can, go through looking at your forecast, doing what-if scenarios, and bringing all of that insight together. Because if there's one thing we all know, it's that everyone's sort of awash in a sea of data points right now. And so it's imperative to be able to bring that together to be able to track your forecast and measure. So what is the problem statement, and why are we even talking about this? I think it's no surprise that in recent times, product launches have gotten harder to hit expectations, to hit forecasts. There are a number of reasons. It really comes down to part of it, being awash in that sea of data. It's really that there are so many moving pieces. And so there are more and more levers that have to be pulled, things that have to be done in the lead up to launch. And so there's a huge lift with a number of people involved. And even for smaller companies, this can be extremely problematic, or even more so for smaller companies. Aside from that, we have aspects that go into things like essentially bucketing into the assumptions that are driving your forecast, the level of insight and the detail available, and then the tactics to actually be able to pull through. So the best forecast that has a rosy picture is only as good as being able to actually carry out and execute on it. And when we have these pieces, there's also the aspect of bringing them all together and not having siloed pieces of the forecast. Where does patient assistance live? Where does payer contracting and rebating live? Where do government understanding live? So being able to have it all tied together and see the interplay is really what's imperative. And it's what's necessary to be able to drive that discussion about the product forecast. So what's happening and why are these problems arising? A number of these have been here, but there can be exacerbated by things like the more data that we have, there may be siloed teams within a company, some doing an epi-based model, others doing real-world evidence and claims-based modelings. We may have different groups targeting patient assistance, as I mentioned, and other groups targeting payers. And then the question is how they all come together. It's the reconciliation of all these points that becomes problematic, even if each of them is executed with a high level of precision. So getting better understanding, better data-driven and analytics-driven insights into each of these pieces, and then being able to compile them so that there is one foundational universal truth or systematized understanding. That's really the key in what we're talking through today. And when we talk about starting at the top of this funnel of assumptions, even talking about market access, if people have a forecast that says we're going to get 80% commercial coverage, or we expect 65% unrestricted coverage, every payer is unique. They all have different enrollments, they have different beneficiaries, they have different benefit designs. And so what the key is that those high-level assumptions, when you're talking about a forecast, the net ramifications of access can be drastically different. So we need a system and a way to understand at a more granular level and at a better level of precision what is actually happening here, what can we expect, what does unrestricted access really mean. So with that context set up, the way that we're going to talk through this today, we're going to talk about better data-driven market access predictions and insights into market access for a pre-launch product. And I'm going to spend more of my time there, but that's going to then flow into a top-level covering of how you go from better market access predictions to payer-specific and what the impact of that market access actually is. And then once you have that, it gets into the tactics that I mentioned, where you have to actually pull through that, the opportunity that you've achieved with your access, HCP level adoption, opportunities, what that means. And we're going to do that in order to talk about sort of the myriad number of pieces of information that go into an accurate forecast and a good bottoms-up forecast. And then that Romit will pick up on how that all comes together and how the Akara Group system can actually help clients understand all of these things and see the pieces moving in sync. So starting at that top, how do we get better market access predictions for a product that hasn't launched? Precision has a tool, we've codenamed it FAST for Formulary Access Simulation Tool. And what we have done is we've compiled an extensive data library on products, launches, market access, etc., and built a system by which we can predict what the strength of a product's TPP's market access will be. And so in the first section on the top here, we see putting in a target product profile, the product attributes, the market it's launching into, etc. What we get is a macro score by beneficiary type, Medicare Part D, commercial, Medicaid. What is the level of market access that we can expect? And so now we're no longer just saying 80% commercial access. We're actually setting realistic expectations of what the headwinds are and basically what we can expect to see coming out. In the middle here, we have the fact that the system is built on all the products that have launched to date so that we have analogs. We can look at products that share attributes and say, well, how did they fare? And so we can give context. It's not just a number floating in the ether that's a score. We can see other products. We can then pick apart, what did they do? What did they have that's different? And on the bottom here, one of the interesting pieces of insight generation from the system is that you not only get a score, but you can see why one product is a 50 and one is a 30. We have the quantification of what is driving market access decisions in that space. And so when we say that every payer is unique and they all have different objectives that drive their decision making, this is the understanding of which levers the manufacturer can pull and which ones are impactful in the space that they're launching into. Our tool is built on a library of product launches over time. The universe is set with every FDA approval since 1980, and we use product launches since 2017 to train the algorithms and to really deep dive. And that's chosen as a point where market access dynamics are more similar to what they are in 2020 than what they might have been in 2002. The system is constantly growing. It monitors every FDA approval, every indication approval, every new launch. And we drive these products and their indications into therapeutic areas, down to diseases, and down to the actual granular indication. So we're constantly monitoring all of these different aspects and looking at the different products available. And those products that were launched in 1980, while we may not care that much about what their market access is today, those products and their generic versions represent the universe that a product would be launching into. So they set the backdrop of what the competitive set may be. For each of these products, what we're doing is systematically collecting attributes about the product, the manufacturer, how it's used for that indication, ATC code, things of that nature. And so with these aspects, the pricing, the packaging, we then aggregate up to the middle column and then to even further to the right-hand column. What we're essentially doing is compiling data and creating attributes that have to do with the product itself, ROA, mechanism of action, MOA, how long it's been on the market for things that have already launched, etc. We look at the market space. Again, maybe those products in 1980 have generics available, so you're launching into a highly genericized market. Maybe another manufacturer has 3 products in the market and portfolio plays are on deck. Understanding product attributes, market attributes, and this forms the backdrop of every piece of information that we know about each product and each indication. And with that, we then move into what is the market access for that product. Again, we're collecting this for every product that is FDA approved. Then we watch over time post-approval what its market access looks like, how it changes. And so again, within commercial or Medicare Part D or Medicaid, we take the tier coverage, we take policies that are in place, step edits, prior authorizations, etc. And we look at the totality of commercial access weighted by for each of these formulary positions, and we put it on a spectrum of basically 0 access to 100% unfettered access. And this becomes our sort of examination, our study variable, because now we have every product with all of its characteristics, the market dynamics, and essentially how payers reacted to it. And knowing that you have a formulary position, again, every payer is unique. Having a step edit in one payer may be different than a step edit in another. And I think we all know it's because one could be a step through a generic and the other could be a double branded step. PAs are similar. So Precision also contracts not only with a formulary data provider, we contract with a pharmacy claims provider and medical claims provider. And so we can actually drive a level of detail further into the policies, not just that there is a PA in place, but the ramifications, the impact that that payer's policy has tended to have. So just going back for a minute, this is the same list of variables. Again, as we collect each of these points on each of these products, what we're then doing is using them to train an artificial neural network, and we're using that network to understand the interconnections between these product attributes, how they play off of each other, product, market, etc., and how they result in overall coverage. Again, because we have all of this, it also serves the basis of being able to look at analog products. We can see every product that we have, their actual scores, their predicted scores, and understand what it looks like. And we can then leverage this neural network by having an input form and allowing the user to put in a target product profile. First, biologic therapy, new mechanism of action, in a highly genericized market. Orphan indication approval date a year and a half from now for a sub-Q injection. Putting in all these attributes creates a target product profile. It then feeds through the algorithm, and by putting in which market it's launching into, we can actually see the predicted score. Again, one of the other things that's useful here is not just understanding the predicted score and saying we're going to have great access for our target product profile, or we have some strong headwinds that we have to fight through, but why? What is it that drives this? And so this slide is looking fairly univariate. It shows different variables and the magnitude of their impact and the direction of their impact on access. But the reality is that the systems combining these and looking at how they play against each other. Being innovative to launch is, the first of your kind with a novel mechanism of action. That is a great positive driver of access. Similarly, if you're second to market and there's a simultaneous launch, that simultaneous launch, another competitor coming out within 3 months of you, that can be difficult. We can all understand, and I think everyone knows top of mind, these things that are net positive or net negative. What's interesting about the system is that it actually quantifies it, and it does it by therapeutic area and by disease, so that we can see that cost is more meaningful in this area than in that, or cost is less meaningful when you are innovative. And it's the interplay between these that is really what helps the client understand the key attributes of their product, what's meaningful, what's driving that prediction. And to some of these, being innovative, it can help with tactics because it tells you this is the message that we need to hit on. So again, when you put in the target product profile, you get the score. You can see where saying 80% commercial access, well, what if it's 80% commercial, but it's only 50% Medicaid? Now you have better insights into your forecast to see at a more granular level what objectives you can hit, what your expectations are. We also have drivers that are different. Obviously, being in a protected class helps in Medicare more than in commercial. So all of these pieces are coming together, and it's just driving a better data-driven, analytic-driven understanding of what market access expectations can be and what it's predicted to be for the target product profile. The other aspect of this is that by running multiple target product profiles and running a range of costs, we can see where the tipping point actually lies. We can see how impactful being a biologic or not a biologic affects payer reaction in that space. And so by running a wide permutation of target product profiles, we can start to get to not just the expectation for one product, but the range of possibilities. And maybe some of those are levers that the client can pull. There could be messaging. We could still be deciding on a package or a WAC. So it starts to get at how meaningful it is to hit different product attributes and be able to affect them before launch. Again, finally, the fact that it's built on all of these pre-launches, the fact that we have all the product attributes, all the market access, I should have said previous launches, not pre-launches, we can then dive in to say, let's look at products with similar characteristics. Example drug A is similar to us. They really didn't do that great. So what do we need to do differently? What actually was the problem? Is it something that we have to worry about? Example drug B may have exactly the same profile as us in terms of product attributes, but their access may have overperformed the prediction. Why is that? And so this can be the jumping off point for further research into, well, maybe they dropped the bottom out with rebates. And so understanding how they acted and what else changed in that market can really give context to what you may be looking at for in terms of tactics. So again, in terms of the gross to net forecast, starting off at the very highest level, let's get better insights, better analytic-driven expectations of our market access. Quantify it, understand what we can pull and what levers we have to deal with, and understand analog products in the context for what the scenario may look like. No longer just relying on analog product A had this coverage in 2 years ago when they launched, so you'll have the same. It's actually understanding for your product and its unique combination of attributes, what can we expect and why. So this is the point where moving from that tool where now we have better expectations of coverage and market access by beneficiary type. This is where I'm going to go a little higher level for things that are actually very extremely detailed, but each of these could be a webinar on its own. But what we do then within Precision, we have better expectations of access. We can run any product profile through at any time, any combination. The next question is, well, if I have different market access, different formulary positions in different payers, what does that mean for me? And so now as we're getting into a more specific gross net for a forecast, this is where the ramifications of those coverage positions really becomes meaningful. Understanding the share impact, not just by formulary position, but understanding that, again, with the uniqueness of payers, having a PA doesn't have the same impact in payer A as in payer Z. And so we have models that actually break payers out and look at the variance in impact by formulary position in the different groupings. And so now when we have not just better market access expectations, but a better understanding of the impact of that market access on utilization, this is where we start to make the bridge into the need for a system that can handle this level of information. Because this is one example where we have a single payer, a single formulary, and we know aspects about it at one formulary position. What is the impact? But tabulated behind this would be every payer, every formulary position, every competitive scenario. What is the share? And that's where you really need a system that can bring it together. Even going beyond that aspect of market access impact, going back to the top when I mentioned there are aspects of getting better assumptions and getting better tactics to pull through those assumptions. Precision also takes that level of market access insight and drives it to an HCP level so that we can say, well, market access is a point. We have expected share impact. How do we actually make that manifest? And it's by understanding doctors, the mix in their practice of the payers with the coverage and what the impacts could be, because once that prescription is written, you then have to get it filled. But the first thing is you have to get the doctor to write it. So we model a HCP level adoption propensity, how the market access mix within their practice impacts their likelihood to use. And we've seen this time and again in our engagements. What it allows is for surgically precise targeting, pull-through opportunities, and the ability to really understand where your, month 1, 2, 3 scripts may come from and hit the ground running in an efficient way. So you're maximizing your resources and you're better understanding where that volume is going to come from. My final point is, talked a lot about market access, getting better assumptions, how that turns into HCP utilization, and we already have an enormous number of data points behind here. Now we actually have to understand that, well, this interplays with our Copay card and our buy downs, and what is that first 3-month gross to net when we're paying out a lot more because of coverage hasn't come online yet, rebates, product costs, and other details. The interplay between beneficiary types. So all of these are just so many network connections, and there are ramifications up and downstream If you pull one lever, what does it mean somewhere else? And this is where I'm going to hand it to Romit to talk about how their system can actually wrangle this enormous sea of information.
All right, thank you, Brett. So Brett described the work Precision does with analytics and access landscape to help develop utilization and share expectations, across different payers and plan types. On the Akara side, we use our expertise in market access, contract operations, and government pricing to help take inputs from strategic assessments, like those developed by Precision, and then accurately model gross to net across stakeholders, whether it's payer, provider, your trade channels, or patient support programs. So before we get into, a bunch of details in the process and systems, I just want to take a step back to look at all the components that can get figured into gross to net. And, on this slide, we're sort of breaking it down between purchasers, payers, and patients. I should note each manufacturer might define G to N a little differently. So whereas one may have a particular area hit gross to net, another may have it hit OPEX. But this is a general and typical view. And, we'll talk in a few minutes, our platform allows categorizing the various liabilities as gross to net deductions or not. So on the purchase side, we're accounting for sales, invoice and cash discounts like prompt pay, chargebacks and rebates to indirect purchasers like 340B or members of GPOs, and then service and admin fees, for example, to SPPs for items such as data. Then with payers, we have access and price protection along with admin fees. And it's the extent of that contracting and impacts to utilization, which is what Brett was speaking to on the first half of this webinar. And then, of course, most importantly, we have patients. Often pre-launch, figuring this spend can be most critical. You're trying to reach your target patients and make the product affordable. And Copay assistance and PAP programs can come into heavy focus. So again, we just wanted to level set on what we typically mean by gross to net. And I'm going to go through some typical pre-launch challenges and then into solutions we've been providing to manufacturers. So as we've engaged more and more with emerging pharma and product launches in general in the last couple of years, we've been trying to gauge what stands out as G to N planning priorities. So we did a quick survey asking emerging pharma market access and finance leaders, almost generally speaking, what is your biggest challenge? And we got a variety of responses, but some concentration in a couple of areas. The quick survey found that the process for list price determination for launch really starts early, goes through several iterations, and often is not finalized until very close to market entry. And because of all the scenarios that result, we've been told that being able to track the impact of various list price points to net sales is extremely important and really hard to do. And particularly because with each list price point, there are changing assumptions on contracting strategy and rates, expected pull-through, and patient out-of-pocket estimates. So list price and the sort of complexity and interplay of the various channels, so whether it's payer access, GPO IDN, or 340B market volume, et cetera, really stood out as key concerns. A little bit more on what challenges with G10 modeling come into play pre-launch. We just talked about list price and contracting scenarios, so what do we have in addition to that? For example, products that might be pretty differentiated, maybe they're high list price, minimal contracting expected. As talked earlier, various patient buy-down planning scenarios can be tough to track, and especially when trying to understand the impact across various benefit designs. So that stands out as a regular concern, especially in that first launch year when you're looking to subsidize those patients. And then, of course, there's government programs. So, for example, the timing and extent of Medicaid rebates. So we may opt into the Medicaid drug rebate program, but that doesn't mean that when the product's commercially available, we're paying Medicaid rebates on day one. There's a lag. State-by-state policies and coverage might impact when you start seeing utilization. So kind of timing that out and then extrapolating those rates to utilization and a liability projection can be a challenge. Then, of course, we have the usually wide spread assumptions that can exist on 340B utilization mix, and of course, projecting the coverage gap for pharmacy benefit covered products on the Part D side. And for those that have medical benefit products, which was 6 out of the 12 manufacturers in our quick reach out survey, they all want to project Part B ASP to understand provider cost recovery. So there's layer after layer of complexity and really a fairly short amount of time to assess various commercialization scenarios. So given that short window of time, let's just put the G to N planning process on a timeline for a second. Our experience has been that gross to net and commercialization scenario modeling becomes a real focus about 12 months prior to expected launch, expected commercial availability, give or take, here and there, depending on priorities. So what you're really doing in that time frame pre-launch is you're running through all the items we've been talking about: list price options, go-to-market contracting scenarios, patient subsidies, and provider cost recovery. But then when we look ahead and we look at, we get to launch and actuals start coming in post-launch, the ideal is to be able to easily compare actuals to pre-launch projections and understand how gross to net estimates may need to be revised going forward. I think there's also a bit of a mindset shift in gross to net analysis that happens post-launch. For example, you go from assessing multiple list price points to now more planning price actions and cadence of those actions. Or from a projection methodology standpoint, pre-launch is driven by payer mix and channel mix. Post-launch, as a healthy volume of actuals come in over time, you may start to transition to a methodology such as percent contribution or statistical modeling like linear regression to serve as a starting point for forecasting utilization. And then there's always what-if analysis of a changing market. So just a week, 2 weeks ago, if the president's latest executive orders happen to move forward, Part B drugs, for example, could get reimbursed based on OECD countries, so most favored nation approach. So it's kind of a question of how to be able to react and model these things at the right time so you can incorporate it into your planning if and when market changes do occur. So, that's kind of talking timeline a bit, and I wanted to mention pre-launch to post-launch because things don't just stop when your product enters the market. That's when things sort of get real, and I don't want to neglect that fact, although the focus here is going to be on pre-launch. So what we're going to do now to round out the webinar is talk about simply a modeling platform that Akara has developed for pre-launch gross to net scenarios and that eventual transition to post-launch. So we take a methodical approach on the platform and really leaned on our expertise in contracting and GP to ensure that the gross to net quote unquote math is precisely executed. We start by defining that target patient population, so the volume of patients you expect to hit or capture, and the top line units associated. We'll then establish a payer mix and a purchase mix. We'll set up all of your pricing. So for example, what are the various WAC or list price points I want to model out? What are the resulting expectations on government pricing, whether it's Medicaid rebates or VA or 340B? And your contracting scenarios, either on the payer access side or on the institutional side or with your trading partners. Finally, reimbursement and coverage gap are factored in as appropriate to the portfolio. Again, medical benefit versus farm benefit. And we let you account for patient spend if you choose to. So setting copay buy-down budgets, for example. And then most importantly, at the end of that continuum, the ability to compare all commercialization models pre-launch, integrate it with actuals post-launch, and then really be able to have a view to, for example, pre-launch, how does a base case compare to my upside case or my downside case or any other alternate scenarios that my market access strategy evolves. So I'm going to kind of walk through this a little bit linearly. Let's start with setting up that sort of top line patient capture utilization. Pre-launch, you often have an evolving target patient capture forecast, and you want to use that as an anchor, so to speak. So we've allowed being able to tie patients, dosing, and national package units together and inputting a top line expectation. And that's kind of what you see on the screen is, I'm kind of entering those top line units. I'm managing it against patients and the entire market basket. This will really drive the projection model as you then get into getting more granular with your payer and purchase mix and then your pricing and contracting scenarios. I should also mention that we allow capture of third-party data to be integrated for context. For example, if you're buying some medical claims data, or if you have some data for expectations and competitor formulary position, that can be integrated as well to be evaluated in line with your brand planning just for context. Okay, so once establishing that top line unit expectation across your target patient capture, what we move over to is establishing our mixes. So what we have is our distribution mix, kind of the grid in the top left. It might be a little bit blurry, but I'll talk through it. And our payer mix, which is in the middle. From a distribution mix perspective, mixes can be set up to really test different trade strategy models. So maybe you're going to have a managed specialty distribution or SPP network. Or perhaps you're going to have distinct SP to GPO member relationships. Any of those can be modeled at any level of granularity. So for example, I could lump McKesson, Cardinal, and ASP together, or I could break them out separately. Moving on to payer mix next. On the payer mix side, I can really set them up at any level of granularity as well. So for example, I could group Medicaid together, or I could distinguish it across fee-for-service versus managed Medicaid plans. I can aggregate Part D or segregate LIS versus non-LIS lives. Same thing on the commercial payer side. You know, I might want to view commercial payer as a whole basket, or as Brett was really alluding to, you know, depending on how important commercial payer is to your portfolio, I might want to break down the mix into ESI Optum Caremark, or even further, ESI managed versus ESI open versus ESI closed. Or if I really want to get crazy with it, down to even expected bid grid positions. So it's kind of, you can do whatever you want, or you can test multiple scenarios where the mix is at high level in one scenario, low level in another. Moving forward here, once we've established, again, our top line units and our payer mix, we can move on to pricing. So on the pricing side, it starts with WAC, and then it, you know, kind of flows down to all of my government pricing price points. Any number of list price or WAC scenarios can be saved for comparison and analysis. And in each case, government pricing is automatically calculated based on, you know, list price alterations that you're making. So, for example, we'll automatically calculate the Medicaid rebate liability, both the base rebate and the inflation amount, the 340B price, and VA pricing. And again, on the medical benefit side, because of the focus and importance of provider cost recovery, we do a bottoms-up Part B ASP projection, which is automatically calculated as any assumptions evolve. Again, whether they're assumptions on the contracting side, on the pricing side, or on my expected mix side. So things like ASP smoothing, lag discounts, bona fide, non-bona fide impact on ASP are all factored together. So once we've set up sort of top-level pricing, both on the list and the government side, we can play with our contracting scenarios. Any contract strategy can be evaluated. So whether it's a GPO invoice discount with a performance hurdle, a payer access rebate and price protection, wholesaler DSA fees, SD DSA fees, being able to designate them as bona fide, fair market value or not, or Medicaid GNAP pricing. So for example, if you wanted to isolate the impact of offering ESI's closed formulary and enhanced rebate, or ION's GPO Excel tier, a deeper discount, those can be distinctly modeled. And alternatively, if you just want to do a blended high-level rate for each channel, then that's fine too. This is also where we can account for run rates for things like expected returns, recalls, for example, or wastage and breakage, allocation for PAP and free drug spend, and again, as I mentioned, designation of service programs as bona fide or non-bona fide. From a gross net management perspective, as launch approaches, channel items can be tied to expected GL categories to draw a line between market access and finance teams. So 12 months pre-launch, I may not be so concerned with the mechanics of financial operations, but then when I'm a quarter out and as I approach launch, I might want to start saying, okay, let's try any projection and scenario modeling to the distinct GL accounts and, you know, revenue recognition processes that are now being established by the finance team. So you can absolutely tie those two things together. So again, we talked about top-line expectations, pricing, contracting. Let's move to the patient side and patient out-of-pocket costs. What we kind of allow you to do is track key patient assumptions on benefit design structures and copay participation to run scenarios for allocating spend towards patient buy-downs. So for example, we can capture, hey, what's that average deductible on a high deductible plan type? What is the expected out-of-pocket max? And a coinsurance rate, maybe coinsurance rate on the specialty tier is 25%. In addition, we talk about what if scenarios. If rebate pass-throughs go through and maybe a commercial plan starts saying, hey, you know what, we're going to allow rebate pass-throughs on our side to mimic the Part D side of the business, you can model, hey, maybe 50% of my payer rebates will pass through to the patient. What does that do to their out-of-pocket costs? So you can kind of put all of these things together to understand, again, impact on patient out-of-pocket cost, and then apply different scenarios and buy-down budgets to get to a copay assistance gross to net item. By the way, and in addition, this is relevant for today, if there's a concern on copay accumulators or maximizers, that can also be factored in on the patient's projected plan year cost share and how they're going to progress through that cost share if they're a part of an accumulator program. So, you know, given the current environment and focus on patient affordability, including recent proposals from CMS to make it hard to exclude those accumulator programs from best price, it's even more significant to keep a constant watch on expected patient out-of-pocket costs. It's a similar aspect on the coverage gap side. So again, if you're a pharmacy benefit covered product and you want to model out what will my expected manufacturer rebate liability be, we let you use standard Part D benefit design assumptions to project coverage gap liability on your expected non-LIS lives. So sort of number one, you could say my Part D expected mix is X, my breakdown to LIS and non-LIS is Y and Z, and then for those non-LIS lives, you can set attributes that CMS sets every calendar year. So what is the coverage gap initial coverage phase amount? What is the troop ceiling? What is the manufacturer share of the covered patient cost share? What's the patient share? So in 2019, 2020, we're at 70% on the manufacturer side. And then what we do is calculate manufacturer rebate liability based on all those factors. In addition, maybe most importantly, the real complexity with coverage gap is just timing, right? When does the brand have comorbidities? Given those comorbidities and given when the drug and the indication for the drug is expected to result in usage by a patient, when does their spend really kick in throughout the year? And then how does that impact when they'll progress to the coverage gap? Maybe another drug will already cause the patient to blow through the gap and they're in catastrophic coverage, or maybe not. You can model those variations across the year to see what the different expectations and rebate liability is. The final thing that I should mention here is that what if scenarios again. So I think it was in the fall of last year late where the Senate Finance Committee proposed eliminating the coverage gap and moving manufacturer liabilities to catastrophic coverage. What if that was closer to becoming reality and we needed to model that out? You could use this platform to say, well, we're going to have no coverage gap spend. We're going to have it on the catastrophic side. What is the resulting change in impact? So what we've walked through, a little bit swiftly here is, again, a gross to net continuum. So, Brett talked through the sort of development of the access landscape, and I talked through taking inputs from that access landscape to develop an overall extremely precise gross to net picture. So, number one, establish top line units. Number two, establish payer and distribution mix. Number three, pricing and contracting scenarios. And then number four, the patient side, most importantly. So their out-of-pocket spend on the commercial copay side, and then on the coverage gap side. And of course, that's your medical benefit, understanding reimbursement on the provider side of care. So that's a lot of stuff, and it can get confusing, and it's sort of a lot to juggle. So maybe most importantly is just simply organizing all of that. And so, what we've done is we've allowed you to tie together all of these commercialization scenarios to provide a clear picture of net sales impact and hopefully facilitate decision making. So if scenario one was, a high WAC with a lower access rebate, scenario two was a lower WAC with a higher access rebate, maybe scenario three is no contracting but a lot of copay assistance spend. All of those scenarios are accessible just adjacent and next to each other, and you can compare the impact on gross to net, net sales, any component you want across, from launch to post-launch, and understand, well, hey, what's this going to mean for my overall liabilities? And then post-launch, as actuals roll in, we just integrate them right in line. So you'll compare to your pre-launch projections in line and connect it to the view of the world needed on the finance side. So again, to summarize, hopefully not too redundantly, we're using inputs from upfront access strategy assessment, crafting a channel-wide understanding of GDAN impact, and hopefully we've been able to talk through that pretty clearly in terms of what we enable on the Simply platform, and through our consulting expertise. So I think with that, we have a nice amount of time here for some Q&A that's been coming in. So let's transition over to that and some of the questions we have here.
Great.
Brett,
so thank you, Brett and Romit.
Yep, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say thank you for an excellent presentation, but I'll pass it back to you.
Brett, do you want to take the first one, or would you like me to go ahead?
I think, Haley, do you have the first question?
Yep. So just for anyone else, if you have any more questions, I'll give you a moment to enter them into the Q&A box. But to start off, what does the client need to provide in order to do the payer analytics or FAST analysis?
Okay, yep, I'll take that one. So really, you need to bring your insights. The system is built on data that we have in-house and that we contract with our partners with to have. What the project starts with is as we're using it in an engagement, is we have a discussional meeting with the client to talk about all those potential attributes that could vary. And so it may be, we think a product may be coming in 3 months after us, but it could be extended and maybe it's 6 months later. And so it's just us having that conversation and laying the baseline of all the possibilities that then allows us to input all the permutations. But in terms of data and things of that nature, that's all held in-house at Precision, so there's no need for data purchases, TPAs, or anything of that nature. Haley?
Okay, great, thank you. Another question, how long does it typically take to get up and running to use Simply for G10 modeling?
So I guess that one is to me. This is Romit again. Thank you for that question. Really, simply put, it's about 2 weeks or less. So for pre-launch modeling, we can deploy Simply really within a couple of days, and then we go through a process of understanding some key assumptions, like list price scenarios you want to model, contracting scenarios, to really establish a base case as a starting point. And then from there, once that's up and running, the tool is live for use to iterate between scenarios, change assumptions, and really start the modeling process we were talking about. So again, I would say 2 weeks or less.
Okay, great. Next question, can I perform a deal, no deal status quo analysis using the G10 modeling platform?
That sounds like a question on the Simply side as well for me. Yes, you can. So, and we actually handle this, I would say, to answer efficiently in 2 ways. On the pre-launch side, by being able to iterate between various scenarios, you can enter an expectations, often using sort of strategic inputs from, for example, what Precision develops to say, hey, if I offer an enhanced rebate and do this deal, I capture more utilization, but what does that mean to gross net? You can save that as scenario A. Alternatively, you could say, hey, if I just kill the contract and, drop utilization, I could save that as scenario B. Or if I keep it the same and, other market factors change, what does that do? So you can absolutely do that side by side on the pre-launch side. You can also do it on the post-launch side using actual claims data to inform the projection. So detailed managed care claims data down to the plan and the sort of formulary benefit design level. And, there's a lot more detail behind that, but that's kind of, generally speaking, the answer to that question.
Okay, great. You mentioned developing projections by applying mixed assumptions. What if a bottoms-up approach is desired, for example, a methodology applied to history?
Yes, so again, this is where I draw a line between what you are doing pre-launch versus post-launch. Pre-launch, with a brand, typically you have no actuals or history. You might have some analogs, but you're really relying on sort of your upfront strategic assessments to get the, an expected mix on the payer side or on the distribution side. to then drive the projections. Now, when you get to post-launch and you have actuals to inform a methodology, again, you can run a linear regression or a percent contribution, something that's data-driven, and then apply market intelligence assumptions to that. So post-launch, we absolutely allow you to do that sort of bottoms-up, data-driven, transaction-driven, methodology-driven approach to projection modeling.
Perfect. And how long would a product need to be in the market for you to get an accurate idea of the access success or failures? So 6 months, a year, longer?
That's a good question. I think that is related to the FAST analysis. So there are really two components here. One is the longitudinal aspect of modeling these products and looking at their access and what they gain relative to their attributes. And we typically look at it at a year-on-year basis. So once it launches, we look roughly 10 months out from launch. And that's because there's so much volatility in those early months as payers are making decisions, P&T committees are forming, et cetera. And what we want to do is not sort of get caught in that whirlwind up front and say, well, that's based on the product attributes, because it could just be that the P&T committee hasn't met yet. So we tend to look at the launch within the tool roughly a little under a year after launch, and then we look at it each subsequent year. And that's because the model has a longitudinal aspect to it that, again, we're predicting for all the post-launch products as well. And as their market dynamics change, competitors come in. One of the competitors has an LOE event. That changes their expectations. And so we're monitoring how long you've been on the market and how your market attributes change so that we can see what's changing there. But the first point within the model is roughly a year out. Anything shorter than that is where, you know, some of those things I glossed over. We do that through other much more mile deep, inch wide analyses on the per payer to bring in when does this payer actually make their decision, and how do other payers hinge their decisions on this upfront sort of first to move decision. And so we do that on a more product specific basis.
Great. Next question is, can the model account for generic competition from generics outside the indication?
Yep. And so again, that's in terms of modeling market dynamics. The answer is it definitely can. So when we're putting in target product profiles, this is actually a really good example of how we use it when our clients have questions. And this is a case that, you know, we have a case study that actually very much reflects this aspect, that some of the competition were off-label generics in the market that they were launching into. And so the question is, when we put in the TPP, essentially if we put it into a market and there are no generics FDA approved in that market, can we say, well, what if there are generic competition? And the answer is yes. We're not locked into what the market dynamics are. That's the starting point, but we can flip all those switches and say, well, show me the same TPP in the same market, but now add in a low to moderate generic competition. And that's the reason that it's a great case study, and it's something that's very interesting, is if that has a net impact on what your market access prediction is, it's important because that helps the messaging. And again, when you go from these better assumptions and better insights into what drives access, your tactics then change because that's the conversation you have with payers. You want to make sure that they're aware of, at least from your perspective, that this generic shouldn't, you know, try not to look at it as competition because it isn't approved. So it can help your messaging, it can help the leverage you pull downstream, but we can definitely model that as well.
Great, thank you for that. So next question is, how does the model account for national payer consolidation?
Okay, so I can take that. I don't know. I think that could probably apply to a little bit of both. Within the FAST tool, we are actually monitoring formulary data at a very granular level and compiling it systematically. We actually do it weekly. And so as those mergers happen, as things come together, we're actually monitoring and pushing the data and analyzing it with the new payer entities. Within Precision, we have a group that does commercial data management. They maintain payer crosswalks and payer spine that links everything together, and they are, on top of all of this, and they're monitoring everything. So we can actually watch in real time as payer entities change, as they merge. We can account for that, how we're consolidating the data, and it's all processed in runtime with the latest and greatest.
Great. So is your model data and analysis for U.S. drugs only, or do you also do ex-U.S. drugs?
For the FAST analysis, that is for U.S. drugs. That's at this point, that's the data that we have available and that we are compiling. On the roadmap is moving into ex-U.S., but there are some things before we get there. So it's on the roadmap, but it's a TBD.
Great. And one more question is, does the FAST tool work in all therapeutic areas?
That's a good question. So FAST is built to compile data across the universe of FDA-approved products. It is much more targeted right now at pharmacy benefit, and so that's Gen Pharm, it's specialty drugs that go through pharmacies, et cetera. We have data, and we are constantly compiling data on markets like oncology or rare diseases. On one of the very upfront slides, I actually had those, and it said coming soon. And the reason is that because of the way that market access works in these areas, the reality is in oncology, the system right now is actually extremely accurate in its predictions. But the reason is that every product, when you look at formulary data in oral oncolytics, basically has the same formulary position, specialty with a PA. So it's coming soon because while it's accurate, it's not very helpful. And so it works mainly in those areas that I mentioned, and things like oncology, rare disease, again, talking about the product roadmap. One of the next steps, and this is more near term than the ex-US question, is to systematize how we use that claims data to drive even more impact and more detail into our target variable. So it's not just that you're a specialty with a PA, but it's much more meaningful. And I think everyone's aware that oncology is sort of its own world with the dynamics going on there. So that's a heavier lift, but it's on the plan.
Great. And it looks like this is the last question we'll have time for today. So can the model for ASP reimbursement levels across different sites of care? So 340B versus non?
So I can speak to that on the Part B ASP side. So, it sounds like the question is what about all the nuances and variations for ASP? Yes, we can absolutely do that. So it starts with, for example, the sequestration rate and when does that expire. So you can time for those things. So when ASP goes from 4.3 to +6, if you have an infused onc product that might have 340B pass-through status, you might be at ASP +6 for a while, but then go to ASP -22, or administration just proposed for next year ASP -28.7. So you can time all of those payment allowance levels and compare it to other HCPCS J-codes that you might be interested in the market basket or the class to understand where you stand from a cost recovery perspective versus others.
Great. So that's all the time we have for questions today, but thank you again, Brett and Romit, for a great session, and to Akara Group and Precision Xtract for sponsoring today's webinar. If anyone submitted a question that wasn't addressed, keep in mind that the speakers will reach out to you directly, and that this session was recorded, so you'll receive a notification in 24 hours when the on-demand session is available for viewing. Before you log off, please take a moment to complete the feedback form so we can continue to improve your webinar experience. On behalf of Informa Connect CBI, Akara Group, and Precision Xtract, have a great day.